And at the end of the day, it was Oscar Piastri getting the victory for McLaren, with Lando Norris going from 15th on the grid to 4th after other drivers were penalized. McLaren now has a 20-point lead in the Constructors because Red Bull came home in 5th with Max Verstappen, and Sergio Perez's podium hopes went away on the second to last lap when he and Carlos Sainz crashed together. Ferrari is 51 points behind McLaren and 31 behind Red Bull. Joe, is this a three-way battle for the Constructors, or does one team appear to be the clear favorite?
Right now, it looks like McLaren is a clear favorite. It just really matters what Ferrari does. If Ferrari comes out strong and fast, hey, guess what? We got a battle on hand. I mean, Charles Leclerc could have easily won this race. He was just outgunned by Oscar Piastri. I mean, Oscar Piastri, brilliant drive. That overtaken move, just breaking so late and just pushing it to the limit to where Charles Leclerc used up his tires. That's where I feel, hey, this is Ferrari showing they could get the job done. They could have easily had a Ferrari podium with second and third. Unfortunately, that last caution ruined it for them. But Ferrari is there. I think they can make this a three-way battle. Just how good could they execute? Red Bull, I'm almost tempted to say I feel like they're the third place team right now.
I 100% have to agree with you, Joe. It feels like Red Bull has fallen off significantly since the start of the season, especially since, I think the big turning point here has been the first win here for Piastri. And I'm not sure. I think the big factor is going to be, one, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but how well Perez can execute on bringing their title hopes back. And I think the other big thing is papaya rules, for not just for the Drivers' Championship, but for the Constructors' Championship. You'd have to imagine how south this could go if Norris and Piastri at some point get into each other fighting for a lead, and just how much that could potentially hurt them. But I think it's, if anything right now, it's looking like it's McLaren's to lose, and potentially Ferraris, with some good running from both of those guys, to maybe upset them.
Yeah. And imagine if we said at the beginning of the year that McLaren would be the clear favorite in the constructors, that Red Bull was potentially becoming the third best team on the grid. Which is really really stunning when you really think about the dominance that we've seen from Red Bull in the last handful of years or so. Yeah, but like I was saying, we really saw this coming. We'll get into those reasons in just a little bit. But for Red Bull, it looked like Perez was going to be able to deliver a podium after a good race, stand behind the lead battle between Piastri and Charles Leclerc. But after a failed move on Leclerc, pushed wide, Sainz got around, and after turn two, got an inside. However, the two collided and crashed when Perez's right front contacted Sainz's left rear. So unfortunate situation there. Jackson, do you believe that this was just a racing incident, or do you put one of the drivers at fault here?
It's two guys not doing the right thing. I can definitely say that. You could argue why Perez was holding his line in the middle of the track and not going lower. You could also argue why Sainz was even trying to squeeze on the outside in the first place. I think it was two guys assuming the other individual was going to do something completely different. So if you want to call that a racing incident, sure. But I just think I want to hear what Joe has to say about this, because I think for me it was, I'd argue it was a racing incident. It's hard to place the blame anywhere other than 50-50.
I feel this was a little bit of a racing incident, especially when we saw Perez try to make that pass on the outside. I almost got the sense he was a little bit timid and he did it completely. He could have pushed it harder on Leclerc. Gets pushed wide, allows to Carlos Sainz, but Carlos Sainz gets wide. Perez comes on the inside. Now, if you remember what happened in Monaco to Perez, he was ahead of that Haas and the two of them crash. I feel like this is almost role reverse, where it's like, okay, Perez is now behind. Lap after lap, they tend to go away from the wall, follow that car, get that slipstream. Could Carlos Sainz done a better job checking the mirrors? Okay, Perez is there. I probably should hold my line. Potentially. Could Perez have said, hey, he's drifting over, maybe I should move over? Maybe, but I feel like this is more of a racing incident, because we're not just going to say, oh, you should have backed out. That's the last thing, race over. You're going to lose that podium finish, whoever backed off. because we were down to what I believe the last 2 laps, and that was leading up to a DRS zone. So yeah, I think this is a racing incident. I can see how people will try to point the fingers at either driver, but really, if you're gonna try to say somebody should be at fault, somebody should get a penalty, then you're taking away what's good hard racing. And with good hard racing, sometimes you're just gonna have an incident like this.
Yeah, unfortunately, these things just happen. And while we may consider it a racing incident, I don't know if Red Bull really feels the same way, especially since Sergio Perez is on an extremely, extremely short leash coming out of the summer break. And we've talked time and time again how Sergio Perez is going to continue to be under pressure from Red Bull, especially since he's been struggling for the longest time now and still hasn't been able to regain, his full potential as a race car driver, as his form has, continued to underwhelm. So, Joe, does losing the constructors lead after Baku and and losing that podium finish as well, do you think this could put Sergio Perez's seat at risk? I know Red Bull were talking about they're going to make a decision heading into the summer break on Sergio Perez, and they decided to keep him in the car. And when we talked about that on the Grit Tonight show, we were saying that just because they said that he was in there the rest of the season, that's not necessarily the case. Because we know Red Bull can be very, very ruthless, and they still have Liam Lawson, waiting in the wings, as a potential backup option. And I just wonder, what is Red Bull going to do?
My prediction is Singapore Grand Prix is next. This is the last chance for Sergio Perez to prove he's worthy of keeping that seat. Because we know Red Bull last year, Singapore struggled. They probably are going to be in a little bit of trouble, but that's a track where Sergio Perez has good results at before. He needs to show he truly is the king of the streets. He could have been 3rd place. Really, he could have been even 2nd place. You got to remember, he got held up by Lando Norris playing the team game for Oscar Piastri. He doesn't need to continue on this slump that has been going so long that now they don't have the constructors lead. It just sort of makes me interested, just wondering what's going on. Because we know there was that rumor about F1 management saying you got to keep Perez because of the attendance in the Mexico City Grand Prix. I can understand there's always pressure. You would not want to put Perez out of the seat because he brings sponsorship money too. He brings fans' attention. He's all over the place. But at the cost of now you lost the constructors. And a team that, as you said, Kobe, they've given Pierre Gasly the, hey, you're out. They've given Alex Albon, you're out. Perez, he lived up to it for the last couple of seasons, 2nd place in the championship. That's the highest you could go, really, because he's not going to overtake Max Verstappen. But now he lost another position. He is just on this downhill trend, and I really got to say, I just don't think you could keep him around. Like, honestly, if I was Red Bull, I'd be thinking maybe we don't need him at Singapore. That's a track where we weren't exactly that great last year. Could we really anticipate Sergio Perez to lead a Red Bull effort at Singapore? They could probably prove us wrong. It's a very technical track, so you don't have the high speeds. That could be an advantage for Red Bull this time. But I'm just sort of, I guess, confused that, you guys had the constructors lead. You're to the point where we had a summer break. It was at risk. You kept Perez in there. Monza, as we said, McLaren could have easily left with it, but they didn't. And I thought, well, maybe Red Bull do something. They did it, and now they lost it. And there's people predicting they lost it for good, and I feel that way. And I really think Perez, Singapore is his last chance. And honestly, I'm just still sort of surprised Red Bull are keeping him still.
So here's the issue with replacing Perez, because I think there has obviously been talks in the Red Bull camp about replacing him. I think the issue you need to realize is, can Helmut Marko and Red Bull Racing honestly look at your 2 V-carb guys, Sonoda and Ricardo, and genuinely say they will be more consistent? Faster, yes, but will they be more consistent than Sergio Perez? And I think maybe, but is that a risk you're willing to take, and doing such a massive shakeup at this point in the season? I think the risks outweigh outweigh the rewards at this point in the season. But I think I'm 100% with you, Joe. I think there's not a lot I can add on because you hit it to a T. But I think if it's not Singapore, it's going to be a couple more races in here where they might need to bring someone else in to really get this construction title fight really, really going.
Yeah, and for all the people out there who say that Red Bull will at least let Sergio Perez run the Mexican Grand Prix at his home race, and then drop him immediately after that, I just want to remind you what happened to Nick de Vries. They literally dropped him one race before the Dutch Grand Prix. If they wouldn't even let Nick de Vries, run one final Grand Prix race in front of his home fans, what makes you think that they're going to let Sergio Perez, run to run one final race with the team before cutting him loose, and then we're at the end of the season when you get to the Mexican Grand Prix, so only a handful of races left to go. And I guess at that point, a change really doesn't make any sense. And I think like the later we go into the season, it really doesn't make sense, to make a change. But we've seen Red Bull make decisions before that didn't make any sense. So I guess it wouldn't be a first if they do decide to change Sergio Perez late in the year. But I think if they do want to make a change, they need to do it soon because time is running out. And, try to throw Liam Lawson in the end. I don't even know what they would do. Would they put Daniel Ricciardo in a second Red Bull car and put Lawson in Visa Cash App RB? Or would they, just simply just throw out Perez and put Liam Lawson? I kind of don't want Liam Lawson to be put in, that type of position, especially since he is so young and still inexperienced.
He doesn't deserve that pressure.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, totally agree with that. I'd be a little nervous if they put Liam Lawson in that seat. I feel like he'd probably be better suited, driving for the RB team, and then later on, go up to the Red Bull team. And I still never understand why Red Bull doesn't think that Yuki Tsunoda could be an option, to be a teammate for Max Verstappen. And whenever I hear Helmut Marko talking about Yuki, it's typically in a negative way. So I guess Yuki's not really one of his favorites.
We'll see him at Aston Martin in 2 years then.
Yeah, but who's going to replace Fernando Alonso, Lance Stroll?
There's a sports car program coming for Aston Martin. Fernando's getting up there in age. What? Pick your poison.
Yeah, we had that discussion on Grid Tonight just a few days ago when we were talking about Adrian Newey coming in. We talked about the sports car program. Lance Stroll loves sports car racing. That could be a great home for him. But also, if you have Adrian Newey come in designing new cars, if you're Lance Stroll, you want to see like what can you do in an Adrian Newey design car. So we're wondering if that would prolong Lance Stroll's stay in Formula One. But I guess that's a conversation for another day. But it is going to be interesting to see what Sergio Perez's future is going to look like, whether he stays or he goes. But I'll say this: I'll be surprised if Sergio Perez is actually on the grid at the start of the 2025 Formula One season. I'll be very surprised if that's the case. But I actually would not be surprised if they let him finish out the year at the very least.